Welcome back to part 2 of our week 2 digital lecture series. It's an asynchronous dialogue with our students in COM 4603, Creating Social Media Presence and Cultural Movements. We're working through 3 different readings at this point in the course, and excited about the questions students are posing out of those readings and trying to engage them as best we can in this period, in between what is so far a very successful series of interviews with working professionals today. And I hope we're gleaning all the valuable data points and information that we can to make this course a successful experience together. Let's jump to questions from Avery, starting with questions out of Interviewing for Journalists, chapters 4 and 5 from Emily Potter. Book just out of reach here. I can see it. But I'll have to grab it in between segments. When preparing, you could potentially spend so much time researching and getting ready for the actual interview. What happened when you actually complete the interview and the answers the interview gave were not really what you were hoping for, or they danced around the subject? Okay, fair enough. I have a response to this. Don't make it about you, right? And don't make it about what you want, right? What you want or anticipate out of the interview. Instead, make what you want depend on what they give you, right? Or again, the essential ingredient of writing strong questions, right? Write the kinds of questions that they can't avoid giving you bad responses. We talk about the difference between closed-ended versus open-ended questions. You want those open-ended questions. Doesn't matter where it takes you, as long as it's open, as long as they're not blowing it off with a yes/no meh, right? And learning to be a superior interviewer is going to empower you to steer those conversations. And it doesn't matter if it doesn't go where you want it. It's about where you can help take it, right? Get them to open up, find those ways. And sometimes there are healthy ways to circle back around to a question again. But if that's a closed door, then okay, we're moving on. We're finding other avenues of information that's going to make this a successful communication encounter. Next question. First part is worded a little bit tricky, so I'm going to interpolate here. At the end of chapter 4, there is a list of things to take with you. And included in that is the list of questions. Okay, so talking about taking a list of questions physically with you. Question: do interviewers memorize all questions, or do they look at their list? Okay, it depends. And this is a great question because it's a practical question. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. If you're a journalist, total fair game to have that list of questions. But my goodness, don't get caught in a loop in a frequent practice of having to read every word of every question. That's a bad habit. Follow up. Also, in a job interview setting, okay, so we're switching scenarios. Should you memorize the questions you want to ask at the end of the interview, right? They tell you to prepare some questions to ask at the end, or they'll try to open the floor at the end of many job interviews and say, well, what questions do you have for us? Is it okay, here's the question, to bring a hard copy of the questions and then read them off? Now, I'm going to be honest, right? I think you're going to get, you can get advice that says both. It goes both ways. People say, yeah, it's fine, sure. And I think especially if you're younger, if you're more inexperienced, I mean, if you need that fail-safe, okay, do it. But the reality of it is they're assessing every aspect of you as a potential employee, and they want to see you being confident in your performance in an interview. And part of that confidence is knowing those questions. And this is I'm gonna cut into a public speaking aside here in a second, but this is where you want to trust yourself in these situations, and that trust comes from preparing in advance. Absolutely important and pertinent to write those questions down in advance. Doesn't mean whip those questions out in front of them and like, oh, let me just unfold this piece of paper here. No, you want to know what you're going to say, and you don't want to have to look like you have to look at notes. All right, in a job interview situation, and then read those questions. That's awkward. It's an awkward communication. It comes off as an awkward communication, and I don't think there's any way around that. Have questions to ask in advance. I think that's something everyone would agree upon. And you know what? If you can't remember the true blue questions you did have, you're conjure some new ones with what information you've gained from the interview, right? Relate what you've been talking about in an interview to some new questions. And that's excellent. What do you really want to know? You know what I mean? Like, too often we're made to feel like we need to be on the defensive in job interviews. That is always a chance for you to empower yourself at the closing. Flip the spotlight on them, right? You are the candidate trying to decide, are you the ideal workplace for me? Are you the people that I want to work with? And that's incredibly important for us to consider. Uprising, Scott Goodson, How to Build a Brand. On page 28, when Volkswagen's launch of, quote, Think Small, end quote, came out, the author writes, it was, quote, the first time a marketer successfully launched a movement behind a brand, end quote. Maybe it's agreed upon, right? We're not going to get lost in that kind of history. What was done previous to start movements? I don't know. I don't know is a terrible answer. We study marketing history here. What kinds of organizations or groups of people were starting the movements? I highlighted this question. Let's make this a central point, right? This is what I want to articulate and communicate to us here. That advertising, right? Once upon a time, right before the internet, advertising was effective, and it was effective enough without requiring social movements or cultural movements or any kind of sparks to that sort of thing, right? These are what Goodson's trying to help us do, is understand shifts over time. And same thing with spreadable media, right? This is why these books are, they're linked, right? They're linked because we can see the links, not because the authors decided these are linked works. They're separated. They're separated by years of distribution. They're separated by, expertise areas and authors. But we can see the links. So once upon a time, advertising could work on its own, in its own way. And people sort of accepted advertisements. People weren't so jaded and cynical about advertising. If I even dare sample regular TV with a young person today, it is incredible observing how impatient they are with commercial breaks. It is as if we've put them on the torture rack here. And that was not always the case. Advertising, highly effective in its history. The gambit is that advertising innately functions like the labyrinth, the myth of the labyrinth, right? You have to keep journeying, and it's going to keep taking turns. And you have to be the kind of person and mind and have the kind of patience, kind of foresight and insight that can anticipate changes and adapt with it. Advertising must adapt or it dies off. And if it dies off, we have to have new methodologies of how this whole commerce and free market democracy works, right? We'll have, and there's a lot at stake if that's the case. I was just reading an article today about an enormous shift in the podcasting industry. $100 million contract was signed with an exclusive company. And what it says about advertising. And one of the points that was being made in the discussion, it wasn't just some clickbait article. It was a rich, detailed discussion, which could be a sign of a stronger piece. We're always talking about good sources versus bad sources in my classes. But a takeaway here was that that audiences thirst for less advertising. And this is an altruism in the world of ads, ad agencies, PR. And so here's what we got to know: that what the ad is, what our message is, matters more now than ever because of the nature of the consumer impatience to hear that ad. See, the stakes are higher than ever, right? Okay, let me jump over to Tommy. I'm going to take a couple of questions from Tommy here. Let me jump down to her questions from Emily Potter's Interviewing for Journalists. Lee Potter mentions that Camilla Long sends snail mail, right, ground mail, to your recipient to do an interview, page 56. What if the address is not known? Okay, fair enough, right? You can't do it. You can't send it. Next question. How does someone still get around the PR and many people that can surround someone, like a politician or sort of a celebrity, that kind of thing? This is a practical question, and here's a realistic response. How often do we get those? This is why you need training. This is why you need credentialing, right? AKA a degree plus experience, a degree plus an active network, right? A degree plus an in. And you've got to work on those things, right? This is, once again, the myth of the degree or the myth of no degree. There's so many voices out there right now telling us, oh, you can get by just fine. You don't need a degree to succeed. That's absolutely true. So long as you have an incredible in, right? When we say an in, like you've got your foot in the door somewhere, the people, you innately receive access to connections that will elevate you to the next level. If you don't have that, the majority of Americans don't, you need other forms of credentialing, degree, experience, continuous labor to develop your own, network system. And I think this is all just to get a seat at the table. The mention of celebrities or even like the Hollywood as an industry is fascinating because this is what do you call it? It's one of the last remaining industries, quote unquote, in America that utilizes unions. And so many of these performers, their agents, the laborers, right, all the people behind the scenes of these things, they're part of unions, and there are union laws. So this is one of the reasons you can't just outright connect with people. It has, it does, but it doesn't have to do with star power. You need certain kinds of permissions. They need to have permission to talk about a thing, right? Because we're dealing with intellectual properties, and you can't just go around letting secrets spill. And what a field of landmines that is. So that's something to think about. And politics is the same way. People spend years cultivating these relationships. This is why we're seeing this kind of bad turn toward cultivating your own media channel, right? So that you'll only do interviews in this one direction because they'll treat you like a king and give you, soft serve you only the questions you want to answer and sound like you're the most intelligent person in the world instead of objectively assessing you, right? And this idea of everything, we live and die by the soundbite, and everyone's just waiting for you to either mess up or give them the perfect soundbite, and that has its consequences as well. Does it generate the clicks? We know we need clicks, yes, and that's for ad revenue, right? That's to make money to stay in business. But what does that do with truth, objectivity? Little t truth, of course, right, as always. All right, next question anyway. Lee Potter mentions that no is not a final answer when asking for an interview, page 57. How many times does someone ask for an interview and still receiving no as an answer before it crosses ethical lines? All right, here's what I've written in response to this. The philosophy is don't give up, right? That's the working philosophy. Don't give up. Don't take no for an answer. But the reality is, don't be so intrusive or rush a potential interviewee, right? This, once again, I was just talking about this idea of cultivating sources, working, developing a network of resources and people are resources. That you're not burning sources, right? That you're not rubbing people the wrong way, being too pushy, or not being cooperative, flexible, right? Swap it out. This class could be, in some ways, this is an example of that, right? Sometimes people in advance quite interested, quite available, and closer and closer we get to execution time, we have to renegotiate, right? Or they may have new responsibilities creep up, forces us to kind of table that, and then do a Hail Mary on the fly, which has happened in this course. And that's totally, does it throw things up in the air a little bit? Absolutely. is that part of the process? Is that even more of a simulation of the real world? It is the real world. And so we have to be flexible to say, okay, that's great. So somewhere down the road, we're going to reconnect again, and maybe we do get to achieve that mutual gain. And in the meantime, we'll what's plan B, right? So that's great. Let's jump to a question about spreadable media. Jenkins points out that we can, quote, become blind to some phenomena and bias towards others, from page 3. How do we always keep our eyes open so that we do not become blind to informational scoop in a story or an interview? Here's what I'd say. Just like a police investigator, gathering strong evidence, archiving that evidence. And so in an interview setting, taking great notes, not good notes, not okay notes, great notes, or recording the interview in some form or fashion, archiving that, not just like, I had a legal pad, I don't know where it went, right? Archiving it in an appropriate fashion. This gives you access to potential insights down the road. Sometimes in an interview, someone gives you a piece of information, you're not getting it. It's the interviewer that's not receiving the information. But if you have that archive, maybe down the road, you look back at those notes, you look back at that information, and say, whoa, they gave me something super important. I was just blind to it. So that's an important takeaway. Now close out segment 2 of our week 2 digital dialogue for COM 4603, creating social media presence and cultural movements. Sit tight. We're not done. We got more to come right after this.